This week's episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 30th and the 31st of August 2023 at home in Wicklow. It was an interrupted recording because of a power failure. And in it, I pick up last week's theme, which was nudity and nakedness, and I expand on the topic and just pick up some threads that I'd dropped and forgot to mention last week. So I talk about male nudity. I talk about shame and the religious frame of shame around nudity and sexuality. I talk about original sin and why I detest that concept. I talk about the German photographer Helmut Newton and his erotic oeuvre, his photographs of semi-clad women who looked quite severe and austere. And I talk about a photographer who has challenged the Helmut Newton back catalogue by reshooting his work using male models instead of female models, and the effect of that. I also talk a little bit about the Burning Man festival and a recent bit of controversy there, and how that made me think about the exclusivity of so many cultural and social and sporting events, and how they've all become the sort of playgrounds of the super rich, and how I have a real problem with that. And I conclude today's episode with a bit of a it's hardly a review, but a discussion of a book I just completed, which is John Borman's Conclusions. Just him writing about his reflections on a life and career in movies, but a really enjoyable read. So that's what's coming up. I hope you can find time to listen. Thank you for coming to The Clear Out. I'll see you around the corner. Cheers.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. I hope this finds you well. How are you? No, I'm serious. I shouldn't laugh after I say I'm serious, but I am. How are you? Sometimes that is a dreaded question. So feel free to throw a euphemism in my face and tell me you're grand. Grand. That very much favoured Irishism. Grand. Which could mean terrible. Furious. Totally depressed. Would you tell someone if you're really happy? Anyway, here we are. Another week, another episode of this thing that I do. And in today's episode, I will be jumping around a bit. I'm not entirely sure where I'm going. As always, in that regard, this is very much and consistently an organic podcast. Very organic. No extras, no additives, nothing genetically modified, nothing that is indicative of an industrial complex of any kind. I don't want to say freestyling. I definitely don't want to say stream of consciousness, because freestyling would push us in the direction of half-assed and frivolous and empty. Stream of consciousness will push us in a very pretentious direction. I'm somewhere in between. I'm perhaps more fully asked, but only slightly pretentious. Anyway, I think what I'll do is I'll pick up last week's episode. Last week I spoke about a lot of different things related to nudity and nakedness, and I was speaking in the literal sense and trying to look at nudity and nakedness and the unclothed, uncovered body in different contexts. But I was also looking at nudity in terms of being emotionally naked, really, figuratively speaking, opening oneself up to another's gaze, which I believe is true vulnerability, but which could be a testament to trust. It could be a testament to confidence. It could be a testament to the high esteem in which you hold the person to whom you are revealing yourself. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that, go back and listen to last week's episode, wherever you get your podcasts. But there were a couple of things I wanted to touch on that I didn't. I'm just going to begin this week's episode with that, and then that'll kick me on to something else. But at one point I listed like famous movie nudes, or actors who have been naked in movies. And even though it had been my intention to list male and female performers, I ended up just listing female performers. And it was just because I think my brain was a bit fried at that stage of the podcast, and I'd let myself get distracted by looking at some different things before I started recording, and it pushed some things out of my head. But actors who probably should have got a mention, male performers who should have got a mention, were probably people like Michael Fassbender and Viggo Mortensen, who had that famous, really effective fight in a Turkish baths in London in the film Eastern Promises, the David Cronenberg film, which came not long after Cronenberg's A History of Violence, which also starred Viggo Mortensen, who strips off at one point in a sex scene with Maria Bello. Is that right, Maria Bello? I think it is, playing his wife in that. For me, A History of Violence is by far the better movie. Just leaner, tighter, cleaner storytelling. Eastern Promises, even though Viggo looks pretty amazing, it's an awkwardly paced movie and doesn't quite work, even though you've got some great performances, particularly by Viggo Mortensen, and also the now departed Armin Mueller-Stahl as a very sinister Turkish, Don, head gangster of a Russian crime organization in London. And the French actor Vincent Cassel as the sort of useless, feckless gangster son of the aforementioned Mueller-Stahl, also very good. Naomi Watts is in that as well. Not a big fan. I'm sorry, Naomi. Not a big fan. She's just a bit of a drip. And Circa Cusack, the Irish actress, is in it as well. But so famous naked scene there for Viggo. So yeah, I just felt that was a bit unfair to mention the females and not the males. I'm trying to think of other famous male nudes in cinema, but I'll come back to that. And I mean, I kind of addressed it last week. It's you just can't escape the fact that the female form has been objectified and fetishized in a sexual way far more than the male body, than the male of the species. And yeah, that's well, I'll jump to it now. It was funny this week, after last week's podcast, there was an article in The Guardian a few days ago or over the weekend indirectly about the German photographer Helmut Newton, who I suppose was at his most active from the sort of 50s right through to probably the end of his days. He died in a car crash, I think, in 2004. But when I think of Helmut Newton, I just think of these, black and white photographs of semi-naked women, very, willowy, lean women, often in, I was going to say fancy dress. I don't mean fancy dress, but I mean, formal dress, sometimes wearing tuxedos, sometimes dresses, sometimes only half dressed, often in what appear to be very luxurious or grand settings in fine houses or hotels or drawing rooms or wherever. And the women would often have a very sort of chilly demeanour, very kind of stern-faced, and they, to me, were evocative of, I don't know, maybe the 1920s. I don't know if I'm placing the look correctly. Yeah, I think maybe the 20s or the 30s. They didn't look like, flappers, but just something belonging to sort of the upper classes, and I think there was always a sense of the forbidden and a sense of the lens being a voyeur, and there was always a sexual undercurrent if it wasn't very overt in the staging of the photographs, but a very distinctive, photographer, stylist, I suppose, artist, however you want to think of him, like a photographer and a fashion photographer. I think he photographed for Vogue a lot, and a very kind of defining, definitive photographer with the look. And if you go back and look at his photographs, you'll see a lot of famous celebrities posed for him at different stages. And I think also in his aesthetic there was something that foretold the chilly 80s vibe, that sort of icy coldness of the 80s, the kind of the dead eyes, and the cold gaze of the subjects. But in any case, there was an article about a German female photographer whose name is, I want to say, Hani Hape. That's Hani, Hani Hape, Hape. It could be Hape. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Anyway, she has done a restaging of some of Helmut Newton's most famous photographs, and instead of putting women into them, she's put men into them. And it's caused a bit of a stir, and it's kind of going, well, hold on, can we objectify men in the same way? What's the effect if we take these famous photographs and switch out the women and put in men? How do we respond to that? And it's just kind of raising this kind of counterpoint to the objectification and sexualization of the female form, and looking at a creator, an artist, whose trademark that was, and playing with that expectation. So in fact, I might throw a link to that article in the show notes. So if you look there, I'll throw in a link to that article, and you can see what you think yourself and make up your own mind. Because there are some photographs from her exhibition in the article, and it's funny. I mean, when my first response was one of being amused. So there's something I think maybe because it's so unexpected, and I am certainly unaccustomed to seeing male models presented that way, as in naked, fully naked, in these kind of sexualized poses. Sometimes with Helmut Newton was also sort of a sort of sadomasochistic vibe to some of the photographs, and so when I saw these photographs in this particular article, I was like, okay, is this a joke? Because it looks a little bit ludicrous. But again, what does that tell you? It just tells you, well, I'm just not used to seeing this. And I don't know, like if a female eye looks at those photographs, are they titillated? Are they aroused, stimulated? Do they find it sexual? Are they turned on? Do they find it amusing? Do they see it as a sort of a vindication of the? I don't know. I mean, it's not. I don't know what words one would choose, but there must be a time in a woman's life. It could come at any time when they just roll their eyes and go, "Oh my God, again, another naked female body, another pair of breasts, another naked ass, another highly sexualized young woman. For whom has this image been made? And what is this image trying to sell? And what does this, what is this implanting in the eyes and brains, or in the brains of young women, of young men, of anyone? It's the status quo, and I mean, I think it's an ongoing. Is it an issue? I mean, it's not a phenomenon. It just seems to be a fact of life, a fact of what? A fact of commerce, a fact of. Do I want to say the male gaze? Do I want to say it's a fact of the appetite for the ongoing sexualization of the female form? Am I going to sit here and pretend I don't often enjoy seeing that? I mean, I think I'd be lying, wouldn't I? I mean, I can be indifferent to it. It's like, oh, okay, grand. And then sometimes you just go, wow, that looks really nice. But then can you look at that and go, that looks really nice, and appreciate the female form, or look at a beautiful woman, and then where does that live? I think that's more where I'm interested in that. Like, where does that live in what I believe to be true about women and how women are and how they think? I don't think it sits anywhere other than aesthetic. Like, it's an aesthetic pleasure, and sometimes it'll hit you. I mean, this must be true for everyone though. Like, you'll see someone or something or an image that hits you in that part of your being that is responding sexually or erotically, like there's an erotic charge, but it doesn't have to mean anything beyond that. I mean, I don't think I'm not being disingenuous when I say that. I think the danger area is when assumptions are made based on about the subject of the photograph. Assumptions are made about the woman in the photograph or the woman in the movie. And assumptions are made about sexual attitudes, sexual availability. Assumptions are made about agency, about complicity, and I think that's a really, really dodgy dodgy path to go down, and I distrust it. But I suppose when there's a relentless kind of conveyor belt of that kind of imagery, it does. I don't know. It's a form of conditioning, isn't it? And I think it takes a certain awareness, a certain willpower, a certain desire to just take a couple of steps back, like a determination or an interest in stepping back to go, okay, what is this really? And then I think it can be dismissed or taken, as I said before, as just purely the aesthetic. But I wonder if, and this is the thing, if we flip the world on its head and go, let's, instead of all these images of naked women and highly sexualized women, particularly younger women, and women in a state of undress, or women in ridiculous poses and contractions of their back or whatever, putting their bum out or their chest forward or looking, whatever, coquettish or sexual or lustful or whatever it might be. If we take all of those images and let's go, boom, wipe them away, and boom, suddenly throw in men in those same images, would men all over the world feel insecure about their own bodies, about their own physiques, about their own appearance? Would men obsess about how they are perceived by women? Would men be constantly trying to measure up to those beauty standards and present themselves in highly sexualized ways? I shouldn't laugh. In highly sexualized ways in various public spaces, and have a very strange relationship with female desire, and a very strange relationship with wanting to be desired but also wanting to be respected. I mean, and I guess on a level, that's what the photographer Hanni Hape is perhaps trying to stimulate that conversation, maybe, or maybe she's trying to stimulate a reappraisal of Helmut Newton's work. And I mean, the actor in me, I always liked Helmut Newton's photographs because they were dramatic. And they had like atmosphere, and it felt like there was a story, and I was drawn to that, because I'd probably have to say some of the women featured in his work sometimes were quite androgynous looking, and so in a way, as much as I'd recognized, when I would have first come across his work when I was much younger, as much as I would have recognized that there were sort of sexualized, images, I didn't particularly respond to them in that way. But it was more the sense of, is this something out of kind of film noir, or what's playing out here, and that's what appealed to me. And in fact, at the start of this year, when I was doing the play Manifest with Broken Talkers, I gave one of the members of the cast a Helmut Newton image. It's like, a bit of a tradition. Any shows I've ever been involved in, usually there's an exchange of cards or little tiny gifts or something before the play opens, and so I gave someone a Helmut Newton postcard of a woman, maybe two women. Was it one? Was it two? I can't remember. In tuxedos in a street. It could have been Berlin. black and white, nighttime, dramatic. Anyway, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. This Helmut Newton revisionism and representation of his work with naked men instead of naked women. So as I said, you can, if you want to check that out, look for that link in the show notes to this episode. The other things I wanted to talk about last week that I didn't, I was going to just tell you a silly little story. Is it a silly little story? It's something that happened. Did it happen to me? Or did I drive it? So when I was in acting school in England, back in the DAY, so I would have been 23, 24. Yeah, I was 23 or 24 when I was in acting school in England, in Exeter, down in beautiful Devon. And I was always broke. Flat broke. And my ears were open for different opportunities to make money. Although I think in the entire time I was there, I don't think I ever I managed to get away with not having a part-time job. How the hell did I manage that? I must have been getting some financial assistance from my parents, perhaps. Yeah. Anyway, it was brought to my attention that there was an art class that was looking for nude models. So I quickly volunteered, and I did, I don't know how many I did, 3, 4, 5 sessions over the course of a year. And that was fine. I was quite unself-conscious about it. And just, again, this goes back to what I was saying last week about context. So I just went up to some artist's studio. It was daytime, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 artists in the room. I'd be directed into a certain pose, and I'd hold it, and away they'd go. And there might be a bit of chit chat. And one of the days, I must have just been sharing that I was over in England studying, I was in acting school, and I was asked to sing. And I was like, yeah, sure, here I am, naked as the day I was born. Why wouldn't I sing on this stool in front of these very genteel English artists? And I would have sung an Irish traditional song, I think. I sang She Moved Through the Fair. And it just seems ridiculous now. But I don't know. I think I was just... I don't want to say I wasn't savvy, but I was quite trustful, I suppose. And I'd kind of give situations the benefit of the doubt and trust my instinct. And I was just like, yeah, grand. Just who cares? A bit of the who cares thing. And also, I had an audience. And, you might be thinking, there I was, the little naked Irishman in the studio with the English artists. And, did I not feel scared? Was I not feeling vulnerable? Trapped in there with them. But you see, really, isn't it more a case that they were trapped in there with me? And yeah, so there I was. I was getting paid to do that. And there was one guy who did ask me if I did private sessions. And I looked at him. We held each other's gaze for some time. And I said, yes. But I never heard from him again. Anyway, so yeah, I I don't know how I let that slip through the net last week. But money exchanged hands, and money well earned, and I'm sure money well spent. And so the other thing I wanted to talk about in that area of nakedness and nudity was the idea of shame, and of course context and propriety. Propriety, or whatever is appropriate in particular contexts. And I personally, sometimes I just feel, I've been very lucky not to have been, made feel ashamed for anything to do with being naked. But I was thinking about the that kind of core part of religious belief and Christian belief, where when Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit, tempted by the devil in the form of a serpent, and they eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, something they've been warned by God not to do. And the second they take a bite out of the apple, it is an apple, isn't it? Or is that something we've just assumed over the years or in the retellings? But in any case, they take a bite from the forbidden fruit, and in that moment they become aware of their nakedness as they're cast out of the Garden of Eden. And I suppose, or it's my understanding, that that's the idea of kind of original sin is born there. The first man and woman, and they weren't able to keep it together. They had it all, but it wasn't enough. We'll just take one little bite. Who's going to know? Over in this corner of the garden, he won't be looking. But as Kate Blanchett, as Lydia Tarr said to the schoolgirl in the schoolyard in Berlin, the schoolgirl who was bullying her daughter, she said, God is always watching. And I detest the idea of original sin. I detest it. I find it abhorrent. I find it. I won't even be able to find the words to express my disgust, my detestation of that concept. To be born flawed, to be born broken, to be born with sin inside already. There's something so perverse and warped about that viewpoint. It pushes a button in me, and I just have this kind of visceral reaction. I'm just repelled by that idea, and this, to reconnect it to this idea of, guilt, shame, a sense of personal failure, moral failure, moral inadequacy around oneself, and the nudity and that shame being synonymous with moral failure, and the idea then that you've let the higher being, the higher power, the superior one. You've let them down, and you can never be readmitted into the clean space. And so the idea of being sullied, the idea of being dirty, unclean, besmirched, forever having that spot, that stain on you, it's horrendous. And I think I don't know where it came from, because this was not ever something that was explicitly given to me or laid out for me or, you know, preached to me by my parents, for example, or I don't know, teachers or other adult figures, you know, as I was growing up. I don't know. There's something that gets ignited in me at the, you know, when I kind of come up against that area, and I have a sort of I don't want to say anarchic impulse, but I have a rebellious impulse. You know, that makes me want to, you know, strip off and, you know, shake my genitals around and go, yeah, it's just a bloody body. Who cares? Who gives a shit? Yeah, I touched myself and it was great. And I touched her too, and that was great too. And what business is it of anybody's but mine and hers, or mine alone, or whatever? You know what I mean? And I'm like, shame. I've spoken about shame before. I did do an episode on shame, didn't I? I'm pretty sure I did. I don't value it, and that doesn't mean I'm incapable of feeling shame. I can, but I don't know. There's something about shame as a moral weapon, as a moralizing weapon to, you know, to put shame on someone else, or to create an atmosphere where someone might feel ashamed, you know, humiliated, less than. And it's one of my great fears as a parent, that I may inadvertently create those factors for my daughter, particularly when I'm failing to control my anger and, you know, failing to insulate her from my issues. And that is something I try to be hyper vigilant about, because I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that I would have grown up in a household where the actions of you know, one of my parents would have led to a lot of, you know, the actions, the behaviour, and the atmosphere created by one of my parents would have led to feelings of shame, feelings of low self-worth. And I don't think I'm alone in saying that. I think my three brothers would feel the same way. And I recognise it in myself. I recognise it in my own parenting at times. And I go, whoa, hold on now. Catch yourself. Because you're being too indulgent of your own crap and allowing your daughter to be collateral damage. And that's just irresponsible and unfair. And yeah, it's yeah, I mean, I've spoken about this before. So again, if you revisit other episodes, I know there was one relatively recently where I was talking about yet another parenting fail, but it's in that area of you know, of creating shame, guilt. You know, children, I think, are, you know, well, most children, I think, have an impulse to please and an impulse to appeal for the approval of their parents and the affirmation of their parents. And it's very easy to become insensitive to that, I think, as a parent, just through, the daily travails of life, or an accumulation of fatigue, or, something that I brought up in the very first episode of the podcast, the idea of just being a bit complacent around the people closest to you, because you work on this assumption that there's loads of time to repair this. They'll be around for a long time, and tomorrow's another day, and we can just indulge a complacency and a laziness, and open the door to a certain deluded thinking that minimizes our bad behavior towards the people closest to us, and it's no good. It's no good. And I as I say, I find I try to be very tuned into that. Okay, so anyway, that was, again, it was something I wanted to talk about last week, the idea of shame and nudity, and I think my own conviction, I suppose, in that area, if you start to kind of take it into the area of sex, that within the sort of kind of Judeo-Christian traditions, there was a lot of kind of guilt and secrecy around sex, around masturbation, around, of course, sex outside the institution of marriage, and Catholicism would have had a lot of responsibility in that area, and certainly growing up in Ireland in the mid 20th century up to the kind of 90s, there were sexual attitudes were still extremely conservative and restrictive, and I think it was a great, it just was what it was. These were the times, but like the church had far too much influence in the lives of Irish people, had too much influence in the institutions of the state. I'm not gonna talk about the abuse in those institutions. That's not where I wanted to go. But it has an impact. All of the the moralizing, all of the forbidding gaze of the church, that had a huge negative impact on, I think, the sexual lives of individuals. I think that's that relationship you build with your sexual self is deeply personal and deeply private. And again, I had the luck to grow up in a house where religion was not part of our experience. My parents were both raised Catholics, but by the time they became parents, they were sort of liberal, left-leaning hippies, and the attitudes in the house reflected that. So even though I spoke a few moments ago about low self-worth and feelings of shame or failure in the family as children, they didn't relate to sexuality. They didn't relate to the body. So I have to acknowledge that, and I remain grateful for that, because through different relationships in my life and, previous, romantic relationships, I just know the impact, that's had on different individuals, male and female. So, shame. No thanks, lads. No thanks. Get the hell out of here. I'm not interested. Own your behaviour, own your mistakes, and own your body. Own your body. That's is that easier said than done? I think it is. I think it is for a lot of people. I think it is easier said than done for a lot of women. But own your body, and as I said last week, look at what your body can do rather than what it looks like. Is that too naff? Is that too facile? Yeah. Okay. I'm not gonna dig this hole any deeper for myself. I'm gonna back out of it and move on. Unrelated, two other things I want to talk about in this episode. Another article came across my desk just yesterday, and it was an article about Burning Man, the festival in I want to say Nevada. Is that right? It's in the desert in America and has been going for many, many years, and it seems in recent times it's morphed from something that really was quite countercultural and maybe hippie-ish and a little bit anarchic and a little bit off-grid. It's morphed into something that's attracted people with a lot of money, and has become sort of a go-to festival for Silicon Valley heads and tech bros, and has maybe moved very far away from what it was. And in any case, there was a protest en route to the festival, in the last week or so, and there were eco protesters, climate change protesters, who were trying to draw attention to the carbon footprint that Burning Man produces every year, because the idea is the whole festival gets, I guess, immolated at the end of the festival, and there's nothing left behind, and so the protesters were kind of going, here lads, can we have a look at this? It's not as black and white as that, but what I responded to when I saw the article, and I've got a couple of friends who've been to Burning Man. One who went there and was part of a crew that built some amazing structure. Another friend who just went to go and have a blast. Now let me interrupt that stuttering flow and tell you that I had to pause the recording there, and I'm resuming it now. Approximately 12 hours later, there was a power cut, and I had to abandon the podcast. And that's, depending on when you're listening to this won't this will have no impact on you, the listener. But it means this episode is coming out a little bit later than normal. Our second power cut in the last week and a half. Extremely frustrating to be plunged into darkness. Kiara had just come home from a rehearsal, and no hot dinner, no hot shower for her. Straight to bed. Not a lot of fun, and the power is still off. So I'm completing this recording the following morning from when I started. It's lashing rain outside, and I'm just going to try and exploit the last bit of battery power in my computer to get me to the end of this episode. So, in any case, I was talking about Burning Man, and yeah, what can I say? Well, I mean, a disclaimer on my part is that I'm not really a festival guy. That's not my scene. And, you know, festivals as, you know, these great communal events, and, you know, and some festivals clearly tip towards a sort of a bacchanalia sort of vibe where we're all going mental together, and isn't it lovely? And it's just, it's just not my scene, and that's fine. And, you know, off you go and have a great time. But you add into the mix, and this is where my cynicism kicks in, and it's like, well, we're doing, you know, what we're doing is so alternative, and it's so out there, and we're the real, you know, radicals. My phony detector kicks in, and yeah, I don't know. I just don't buy it. And generally the very sort of performative, having a good time, aren't we so, you know, exhilarated by this whole experience, and maybe that's coincided with how it's relayed back to us on social media, or how people will, you know, feel compelled to tell you all about it for the rest of their days. It just leaves me cold. And of course, I'm exposing myself as a bit of a crank. But that's just how I feel. And I'm more of a one-to-one guy. I mean, there's a reason I like to swim by myself. There's a reason I was attracted to the kind of ascetic, disciplined, solitary martial arts life as well. I like my own. It's not that I enjoy my own company. I like being alone, and I like being left to kind of focus on my own thing. I just sound miserable, don't I? It's pathetic. Anyway, that's just a disclaimer, okay? So you know, I can't sit here and go, I'm unbiased or I'm objective. But what I will focus on out of that story was the idea that suddenly this big event, which, as I said earlier, presumably started in a much more lo-fi, organic way, has become this chosen festival of extremely wealthy people, and, you know, arriving in super duper RVs, and what struck me, what I took away from that article, was not so much rolling my eyes at Burning Man, but in general the trend across the world, it seems, of events, huge sort of entertainment events or sports events, are becoming more and more exclusive and prohibitive. And it's I find it kind of disgusting, because suddenly all these kind of great experiences are just going to be something available to people with loads of money, or people who don't have a lot of money but are killing themselves to get there. And there's something that feels very undemocratic about it. I mean, if I switch over to the Premiership, for example, football, in the English Premier League, I think the club I support has the most expensive season tickets in the Premier League. And what it's doing is, and I know this sounds like a cliche, it's kind of squeezing out normal people. And it's squeezing out the kind of, it's removing the sort of the affordability and the democratic experience of, we can all go to the football and enjoy the football. And, I would argue that you can say that about a festival like Burning Man, maybe Glastonbury, I don't know. Again, I'm not a festival guy. But it's just, again, that sense of exclusion, the sense of people being left behind, I mean, if Burning Man was, free, easy to get to, whatever, I probably wouldn't go anyway. But there is something that just feels so wrong and imbalanced when all these various experiences, and I think there is a correlation to how these experiences are relayed on social media. And I mean, I think this has been one of the most damaging aspects of the internet age, where people can constantly present, lifestyle, experience, lifestyle. And it creates this kind of illusion of extreme living and extreme experience and extreme kind of high-end lifestyle that I think has driven the desirability of these events up and made them more exclusive. And I suppose as people with money kind of come into them, it changes the chemistry, and it changes the dynamic and the kind of the base setting of the experience. And that's what I kind of found myself going, hold on, there was a climate change argument there, although apparently Burning Man do work very hard to offset their carbon footprint. But I think those protesters were trying to make a larger argument about, forget this kind of tokenistic offset, and let's look at kind of sustainability and a long-term sustainable focused approach to addressing climate change. And I think, that was part of that argument, where people, again, the performative, hey, I'm green, I do this. And I guess their argument was like, no, it has to be like that, has to be the lifestyle. Like, not the event is not the lifestyle, but committing in a very widespread, sustainable way to whole cultural change and whole kind of societal change to address the climate crisis. But yeah, I mean, as I say, my takeaway was rich people. Stop wrecking everything. So for me, it ended up being a sort of a Marxist position, or an economic injustice position, or how an excess of wealth and disparity of wealth ruins everything. Do I sound really naive? Maybe I am, and maybe I haven't made that point very well. In any case, have a think yourself about that one. I think it is worth reflecting on. And again, the solution, I don't know what the solution is. Like, the solution is, it is more of a socialist mindset to go, hold on, we have to stop just surrendering to the people who are dictating, the market value of these experiences, and go, you know what, no, we're not going. Tools down until something more equitable redresses the balance. Because it's just, it just seems insane. It just seems to be only moving in one direction, and there's something about that I find sort of despairing and depressing and infuriating. And it just seems like people are too meek to care. And people will just go, oh, well, it is what it is. That's the experience. That's what you have to pay. Suck it up. And, it just reverts to a sort of a, if you worked hard enough, you'd be able to do these things. And yeah, I'm not gonna start waging class warfare right now at the end of this episode. Maybe I should do a special on that. Anyway, that's all on that. One final thing for today's episode. I wanted to quickly talk about a lovely book I just read, and that book is called Conclusions, written by the director John Boorman. He wrote it only in the last couple of years, and he's a really lovely writer. And it's, broadly speaking, it's just him reflecting on his life and his career as really a highly successful filmmaker. And the book is not that long, but it's full of juicy little stories and anecdotes of various actors and Hollywood and film people that he worked with. But it's also the story of his family. It's the story of his different wives, and for me, most kind of movingly, it's the story of his life living in Wicklow, where I live. And he lived not far from where I sit. I always knew he was in the area. And he writes these lovely passages about his home in Wicklow and the surrounding countryside and landscape, and the trees especially being this sort of haven for him over 40 or 50 years. Now, I'm not sure that he's still there. He may have sold up in the last year or two, because he's become quite elderly, and he writes about that very eloquently in his book as well. Just kind of getting older and having kind of diminished faculties and the frustrations of that. But yeah, just a really, really nice read. He's just got a really nice authorial voice and expresses himself very well, with some really nice kind of observations and insights and a bit of self-deprecation, which I always appreciate. But a director who probably had his heyday earlier in his career and never kind of recovered those heights. I mean, most famously, perhaps, he was the director of Deliverance, that kind of male kind of rite. I don't. It's not a rite of passage, but the male kind of trial by fire movie, civilization versus kind of atavism, I suppose, and a brutal and kind of terrifying movie in places, but really, really brilliant and brilliantly directed. And what an announcement of Burt Reynolds' talent in that particular role. Also the director of Point Blank, the Lee Marvin kind of pulpy revenge thriller. Lee Marvin as the wronged criminal in a heist who goes after the bad men who've done him wrong. And that's a really, really good movie as well. As a kid, I remember enjoying The Emerald Forest with Powers Booth trying to find his son, who is basically abducted by a tribe of Amazonian Indians. Powers Booth is like an engineer or something. I remember watching that as a kid and thinking it was a very kind of beautiful movie. Zardoz, not so sure. Still not so sure. Cult following. Sean Connery in very dubious sort of bandolero codpiece. Excalibur, of course. And I remember working beside a lake not far from here as a teenager, and in the woods you could still see nooses hanging from the trees, which would have been used in the filming of Excalibur. And I suppose after that, his probably his most successful movie after that came a lot later, which was The General, the black and white sort of biopic of the Dublin gangster Martin Cahill, played memorably by Brendan Gleeson, and also a very memorable performance by John Voight as a convincing rural Irish cop who's trying to track down the general. But yeah, interesting. Just a really nice book, and just There's a bit of class stuff in there as well. He came from very humble beginnings. Hope and Glory was his other great movie, which is basically a version of his childhood growing up along the kind of up the River Thames. A really sweet movie. But like that's in there as well. Just his relationship to nature, his relationship to class, to his Englishness. And sometimes I found myself, particularly when he was talking about Ireland and certain Irish characters that he knew in the area, I was like, is he over egging this a little bit? Is there a hint of patronising the Irish here? I wasn't sure. There was just something tonally that I was like, I'm not quite as comfortable going on the journey with him here. But a slim volume, and one I wouldn't hesitate to recommend if you like movies, of course, as I do, as some of you may. But yeah, he's just a really good writer, and he's quite succinct and to the point, unlike me, you might say. But yeah, that's definitely one I recommend you check out. Okay, so there you go. A few different things today, and I think I'll leave it there. The rain is coming down. It looks particularly green out there, although autumn is coming. The leaves on the shed in the garden are turning red, vivid red. It's a lovely time of year. My daughter went back to school yesterday, not with a huge amount of enthusiasm, and then waking up today, no power, lashing rain. That did nothing to change her mood. But she'll soldier on. As we all will. Okay, that's it. I will be back next week with something else, and generally it's always connected, isn't it? I mean, I'll continue the theme of having a look at this thing we call life and trying to work it out and being honest about constantly, well, in my case, constantly failing to do so. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it if you chose this podcast, particularly if it's your first gamble on the clear out. And if you're a return listener, wonderful. Thanks for coming back. You can throw me love on social media if you like. All the links will be there wherever you're listening. And if you are so enthused and think this is a worthwhile thing that I do here, and even not worthwhile, let's not make it a moral thing, just enjoyable, just diverting, just pleasantly distracting, just infuriating, but you're a masochist, you can support this independent podcast on patreon.com/theclearout, and I'd be incredibly grateful for anything you can do for me in that area. It just would further motivate me and reassure me that this is something worth doing. Okay, that's it. Take care, mind yourselves, and I will talk to you next week. All the best. See you. Bye.